Don't mess with my worldview. Terror management and evil actions. This week's question is, what role does terror management play in evil actions? The required reading is Terror Management and Aggression, Evidence that Mortality Salience Motivates Aggression Against Worldview Threatening Others by McGregor et al. So here we have a mildly humorous comic strip in which this ram pig creature on the right illustrates one of the core tenets of terror management theory, which is how we try to gain a sense of immortality via our works and achievements. But how might we react when such efforts are belittled or criticized? How do we respond when our values and beliefs are threatened, especially when we are reminded of our own inevitable death? Terror management theory posits that humans have a unique experience in that we can consider our own mortality. According to terror management theory, the terror brought on by this awareness of mortality is managed via development of a sense of immortality via two primary mediators. First, a sense of permanence, order, and meaning instilled via a culturally inherited worldview, along with the standards for living which come with that. Second is self-esteem, which we achieve through the knowledge that we are upholding those standards. And this sense of immortality can be either symbolic, which is the case that the ram pig creature illustrated, living on in memory and through the impact one has, or literal in the case of belief in an afterlife, which can be instilled by religion. So within the context of terror management theory, the concept of mortality salience refers to when individuals become immediately aware of or reminded of the inevitability of their own death. As previously discussed, our worldviews are used as a buffer against the terror brought on by awareness of imminent death. Considering this, McGregor et al. Hypothesized that mortality salience will increase levels of aggression toward those who challenge individuals' terror buffering worldviews, which they refer to as the worldview defense hypothesis. For a brief synopsis of McGregor et al.'s method before we get into the details, they first had participants complete a writing exercise about either their own death or a control topic. And the control topic was their next upcoming stressful exam, because all participants were college students. Second, they had participants read an essay criticizing either their own or the opposing political affiliation, and that essay was allegedly written by a fellow participant in the lab. Third, they had participants administer a chosen amount of hot sauce, which the author of the essay they had just read would allegedly be made to consume. In terms of participants, McGregor et al.'s final sample included 70, roughly equally male and female. Participants were all introductory psychology students at the University of Arizona, participating in exchange for course credit. And recruitment was based on scores on a political affiliation measure. They only included those who scored as moderately conservative or moderately liberal. Presumably, they left out the relatively neutral scores because those individuals wouldn't have much to respond to or react to. They wouldn't be offended or supported by something criticizing the opposing or their own worldview, their own political affiliation. And they don't explicitly say why they excluded those who scored on the extreme ends of conservative and liberal. Their procedure involved a 2x2 between subjects design. First, there was the mortality salience versus exam salience condition. And again, the exam salient condition served as the control group. And then there was the worldview threatening versus worldview consistent conditions. So McGregor et al. Presented to the participants that there were two separate studies being conducted, one after the other, which in the article they refer to as Bogus Study 1 and Bogus Study 2. In reality, it was all part of one study, which the participants were not informed about the true purpose of. So bogus study 1 was described to participants as investigating the relationship between personality and impression formation. That's impressions of others. And participants were first given 5 minutes to write a short paragraph about their own political opinions. Then their paragraphs were collected and they were given a questionnaire packet to complete. The questionnaire packet included first a filler personality measure, second and most importantly a writing task which prompted participants to describe either the emotions aroused by consideration of an expected physical experience of their own death or of taking their next important exam. And this served as the mortality salience manipulation. Third, they included the PANAS 10, which is a version of the positive and negative affect schedule, able to complete it in 10 minutes or less, hence the X. Next came the worldview manipulation. So after the participants filled out the questionnaire packet, they were provided with an essay to read, supposedly written by a fellow participant in the lab. So on the right here, we have, from the article, a sample of one of these essays. This would be the one criticizing conservatives. So participants who were conservative who got this essay would be in the worldview threatening condition because the essay is criticizing their own political affiliation or an aspect of their worldview. And those who were liberal who received this essay to read would be in the worldview consistent condition. As I previously said. And then after reading the essay, participants were asked to evaluate it using an impression formation form, where they would have to guess specific information about the author of the essay, demographic, personality information. And then participants moved on to bogus study 2. Bogus study 2 was alleged to explore the relationship between personality and food preferences. So participants were told that they would be tasting and providing impressions on different foods. They were also told that participants would be administering food samples to one another, allegedly because the experimenter needed to remain blind to the types and quantities of food tasted. Participants then completed a taste preference inventory indicating which tastes and textures they preferred. Participants were then told that they would be testing dry foods. All participants were told that they would be testing dry foods, and they each received a saltine cracker allegedly selected by another participant. Participants rated their liking of the cracker, and then they were told to prepare a sample of hot sauce for the participant who was allegedly the essay writer of the essay that they had just read, either criticizing or supporting their own political affiliation. And they were provided with the supposed taste preferences of that essay author, which indicated that they disliked spicy food. Participants were instructed to allot as much hot sauce as they wanted for the other participant to consume. They placed the hot sauce into a styrofoam cup and then sealed the cup and gave it to the researcher to go give to this participant allegedly, but in reality there is no other participant. And they were told to sample the hot sauce themselves first, just to get a sense of the spice level, and apparently this hot sauce was quite hot. Participants were reminded again of who the sample was going to, and to ensure that they were aware that it was going to the writer of the essay that it read, they had to write the essay author's identification number on the cup, which would have been on their essay as well. Participants were then asked to complete a checklist going over the steps of administering the hot sauce, which ended in them having to indicate number of spoonfuls given, as that was used in one of the measures. They then placed the checklist in an envelope to preserve their anonymity. And shortly after, participants were debriefed, and they were assured that no one had actually consumed the hot sauce, and that the experimenters were fully responsible for their actions, just in case anybody had felt guilty or embarrassed about, giving an excessive amount of hot sauce to somebody. So the most important consideration for the results was the difference between how much hot sauce was allotted by those in the mortality salience and worldview threatening condition compared to the other three groups. So this table shows the means of hot sauce allotted in grams of the three groups, or of the four groups. Highlighted is, or circled, is the mean of those in the worldview threatening and mortality salience condition, which was significantly higher than the other three groups, with a p-value of less than 0.02. So that was quite significant. Interestingly, those in the worldview consistent and mortality salience condition administered less hot sauce than any of the other three, than even those in the control condition. But this difference wasn't significant. Also, those in the control conditions did not administer a significantly different amount from each other. And these results offer strong support for McGregor et al.'s hypothesis that mortality salience would increase aggression levels towards worldview threatening others. And the fact that participants in the mortality salience and worldview consistent condition did not administer more hot sauce than those in the control conditions suggests that the threat to one's worldview was necessary for the mortality salience to cause any kind of increase in aggression. And the fact that those in the control conditions did not administer a significantly different amount from each other suggests that mortality salience was necessary to have an effect from the worldview threat. So McGregor et al.'s findings do suggest that terror management has an impact on aggression levels, at least towards worldview threatening others. But is hot sauce allocation a perfect measure of aggression, or more importantly for our purposes, evil? Consider these three main criteria of evil actions: harm, intentionality, and excessiveness. So in terms of harm, eating very spicy hot sauce can cause some amount of harm. It can cause a little bit of pain and discomfort, especially if one is not used to or dislikes spicy food. But does that level of harm rise to a level most would associate with true evil? I would say probably not. I don't think most people would consider the amount of harm inflicted by eating some hot sauce, regardless of the intentionality or the excessiveness, as anything that you could associate with true evil. I think that's relatively benign. But these are the limitations of trying to study evil in a laboratory with the ethical and practical guidelines involved. And in terms of intentionality, can we be certain that participants in McGregor et al.'s study intended to inflict harm? It's possible. You could maybe assume that. but the decision to administer as much hot sauce as they did could have been made unconsciously, even if aggression did play a role. So it's possible that even if aggression did affect how much they administered, it wasn't an intentional, conscious decision to try to harm this other person. So they did notice a general increase in those who were in the mortality salience and worldview threatening condition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was an intentional increase. In terms of excessiveness, if participants did act with the intention to cause harm, can we say that it was excessive given the provocation? So the provocation in this case would be the threat to the participants' worldview by disparaging their political affiliation. The supposed persons disparaging the political affiliation of the participant would not have written their essays with the intention of insulting the participant, if we're assuming that, if we're granting that they actually were written by another participant. In reality, it was staged. But the participant would have assumed that, they were just writing their own opinion as part of this laboratory experiment as they had done. So the provocation, if we can call it provocation, wasn't direct or intentional itself. And if we are to accept the insult taken for the essays as a proper kind of provocation, and some degree of retaliation is to be expected, can a little extra hot sauce be considered truly excessive? I would say no. If we consider that genuine provocation and there's any sort of retaliation expected, I think that's about as benign and mild as you can get, just administering a little bit of extra hot sauce to somebody. So considering these criteria, it may be reasonable to assume that the hot sauce paradigm can assess aggression alone, but evil is another matter. The ethical and practical limitations of psychological research make it difficult to study true evil in a laboratory setting. So the most that can be said, based on McGregor et al.'s findings, is that terror management may play some role in evil actions by way of increasing aggression levels, but only toward those who pose a threat to one's worldview. So it's a pretty firm assertion we can make that it does have an effect on aggression, but considering these three criteria for evil, all we can say is that it may play some role. And that is it. Thank you. And here are my sources.